I'm Carolyn Savage. If there are people that don't know me, there seem to be a lot. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here, and I'd just like to welcome you all here this afternoon. We're really excited to have Dino Thompson back to talk about the 70th anniversary of Hurricane Hazel. This program was originally scheduled for the fall, so it would have been the 70th anniversary, and now it's kind of 71st, I guess. But so we're so happy that Dino was able to reschedule with us. If you have the time, do take a few minutes to look at the photos that we have back here. This is a pared down version of an installation that was at the Burroughs and Chapin Art Museum in 2004, I believe. And there's a lot of good information there. So do take the time to take a look at that. And also I wanted to let you know that we have Dana O'Brien in the back of the room. She is the emergency management specialist with the city of Myrtle Beach. And she's got a lot of information on hurricane preparedness. She has a new QR code on these magnets back there that if you pick one of these up, it will link you to all kinds of information on creating a go bag and lots of information that will be available as things happen if emergencies do arise in our community. So that is all. And I'd like you to join me in welcoming Dino Thompson.
Well, it looks like a lot of people have nothing to do today. Those of you that, I see a lot of faces that were here during Hurricane Hazel. And I'm sure we all have a story. I wish we could all listen to your personal stories. They're probably as good as mine. We came here in '46 in October, and we were on the way to Florida. My dad got out of the Army and got a job at the Newport News shipyards, and when they laid off a bunch of people, they laid him off, and so he packed up 1940 LaSalle, and I was in a box in the back. I was 4 months old, and headed for Florida. And back then, you had to come down 301 was the main highway, but it stopped in Wilmington, and you had to get off on Ocean Highway 17, that little highway right there. It was 2-lane, and it wasn't all paved until the Woodside brothers finished that part of it. And that's the day we stopped. And there's that LaSalle. Looks like a Capone car back then. That thing went through the brick in front of the Cozy Corner one time. Mom said the brakes failed. They didn't, but anyway, that was her story. And Dad and Mom stopped there, and they took a Brown 8 picture or whatever it was, and that was the first day we arrived. I always loved that little picture. And you can see the sign, Cozy Corner Restaurant, sticking out. And that's the Cozy Corner in the '40s. Max 5 and 10 here, the Broadway Theater. This later became J&J Drugs. It was Nile Drugs. The Seven Seas Restaurant right there. These apartments up here were built by the Hobika family. And that was my room, and that was Mom and Dad's room, and I lived there till I was 14. So this is where we hunkered down for the hurricane.
What avenue?
It's at the super block. This is the super block here that they're working on. And yeah, it's Broadway Street.
We call it Main Street.
Yeah, back then that was the town, a block long. When you got to the church on your bike, you need to turn around. When you got to the Methodist church, you need to turn around. You were out of town. This picture of the Cozy Corner is the same year. Not the same year, it was 4 years later. They had bought a Roadmaster Buick here, sitting right here. And that's me standing out front. This is 3 months after Hurricane Hazel. this sign, that fish were never found. So 3 months later, we got Tyson and Company to build a new sign. And that's the new one there. And that one was there till about 1959. Now, this Jeep will play a big part in the story, in the coming story. But we have to set the scene now. South Carolina was in the midst of a blistering drought. It was the driest year in the history of South Carolina, even to now. We had had a pretty busy hurricane season, 16 tropical storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes, Carol, Edna, and Hazel. Carol and Edna skirted the North Carolina coast and went up to New England and destroyed 4,000, Edna destroyed 4,000 houses. Carol wasn't that bad, but there was tens of millions of dollars in New England. So we hadn't had a storm, but we needed one. The farmers across the way were calling their kinfolks and friends trying to find out who knew how to draw rain or douse. And even the preachers were taking part of their sermons to pray for rain. You could walk across some lakes. You could play football in some of the ponds. And the gnats and mosquitoes were fighting over mud puddles. I mean, it was a dry moment. So that was the setting. We needed rain. We were praying for rain. We didn't expect what we got. Sometimes I have a good memory, but sometimes I have to write a few things down. 60% of South Carolina back then was rural. We didn't know, but on October the 12th, 3 days before Hazel, it blew through Haiti and killed almost 1,000 people. We hadn't even heard about that. It wiped out their crops there. And news back in those days were teletype. Sometimes they were a day late. Not everybody had a teletype to receive the news. And the main weatherman that was tracking Hazel's path died of a heart attack after the 4th day of Hazel. So we lost track of it for a while. People had to pick up the pieces to find out what he'd been tracking, what he knew, what he didn't know. There were very few TVs in those days. The last we heard, there was a storm out there. Nobody told you it was a 4, a 5, or a 3. They didn't say there was 100-mile-an-hour winds or 160-mile-an-hour winds. We just knew there was a storm. And since 16 of them had skirted us, we figured this one was going to skirt us too, because that's the last we heard. So on the night before Hazel, most people went to sleep in South Carolina and North Carolina. And then late that night, local fishermen knew it was going to be a full moon tomorrow, but we did not know it was going to be the highest lunar tide of the year. Now you take a high tide, you put 2 feet on the tide, and you take a lunar tide, you put 2 more feet. So when Hazel landed, 18-foot surge on the bad side, 14-foot on the good side. It destroyed 85 to 90% of the houses from Pawleys Island on the good side, Surfside, and Garden City. And it destroyed about 400 houses in Myrtle Beach. North Carolina lost 15,000 houses, and they weren't ready for it. They didn't know it was coming. 23 people died in North Carolina. We had one person die in South Carolina. Some idiot tried to ride his boat out. and Little River, and I don't know if they ever found him or the boat. So we hunkered down here, and we were sitting here in the dining room. My mom and two of the cooks had cooked up a big thing, and everybody from the entire block was sitting in the restaurant enjoying food and drink. I think Dad might have had a little bit of illegal alcohol in there. And we thought everything was okay because we're 300 yards from the ocean. Well, I remember the wind was picking up. Nobody told you it was going to be 150-mile gust or 160. We knew there was a storm coming. We'd been through storms. And I remember we're sitting there with it. We had the tape up on the window. You know, nothing can come through a window when you put that tape up. And my grandmother and my mother, who were quite religious, they were reading the Bible. And my grandmother sprinkled holy water on the windows, so we thought for damn sure nothing could come through those windows. We heard a ping, 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 and a galvanized garbage can, they weigh about 35 pounds, came right through the window, hit the back wall, which was mirrored, and broke the mirrors. And my dad, he must have been on Valium his entire life, even before there were Valium. He just looked up and said, maybe we go downstairs in the basement. So everybody was already running downstairs in the basement. He got his player cigarettes, and down to the basement we went. And that's where we weathered the storm. About 45 minutes in, or an hour, I can't remember. My grandmother's praying out loud. My mother's praying out loud. They wouldn't let. Joe Sikel was down there. The Hobekers were down there. Chris Mashures was down there. Mrs. Lieb, who owned the glamour shop, was down there. Barbara and Betty Hirschman, who lived up in the apartments with us, they were down there. I don't know if Mr. Jameson was there or not. So Dad decided they wouldn't let him smoke. So he leaned over at me and he said, put your jacket on. We're going for a ride. Well, even at 9 years old, I thought, this is a stupid idea. You know, I've just seen crap flying through the air. I saw signs that I recognized from down the street. But I followed Dad everywhere he went, so out we went. And that's a 1940 Willys Army Jeep. He bought it at Pickens, South Carolina. They had 1,000 of them lined up, everyone the same. I think they were $600-700. And I remember he opened the glass door, which had beautiful painting on it that said air condition, had icicles falling off the letters, because back then air conditioning was a big damn deal. And when he opened the door, a huge gust just slammed it against the brick, and all the glass fell out. Took him a while to lock it, and then he picked me up and put me down, and a gust in the alley just took me down the alley. And he caught me. I rolled through a bunch of water, and he put me in the Jeep, and he tied me with clothesline, and my hands were even tied. So we went. This is where we went. He wanted to see the Ocean Plaza Pier disappear. So we parked here, right on the boulevard. There was about 3 feet of water in the boulevard, and the waves were crashing. And every now and then one would hit us in the Jeep, so he said, maybe we back up. So we backed up to about here. That was Mr. Ramsey's New Way Laundry. He later sold it to Lambeau Schwartz. All of y'all know both of those prominent families. So we started watching the waves. The waves were 20, 30 feet high, and the wind was howling, I don't know, at least 100 miles an hour. We were on the good side, but I know who knows how fast the wind was going. The first thing that I saw fall the waves were making the entire pier disappear. It would just appear when the waves would back out. It was the casino restaurant. They called it the casino back then. And that collapsed first. And I remember as a child, you just never forget that sight. It floated like a huge ship on the crest of the waves, and it'd go in a trough, and it'd come back up, and finally it just started breaking apart, and then it was gone. And then the rest of the pier, the end fell off, and then the rest of it fell off. Everything was gone from here, there. The front of the Ocean Plaza was badly damaged, but it stayed. It was very well built. And you can see most things were one story, some were two. Most of those houses were damaged badly or gone, and some were picked up and put somewhere else. When it hit, we found out about the storm from Merlin Bellamy. He was what they called a weatherman up in North Myrtle Beach and the chief of police. So Merlin calls, he gets a call, ships out at sea, said, we've been plotting this thing for 20 hours, it's turned, it's headed right at you. So they started evacuating everybody. The governor, Burns, came on late in the morning saying everybody has to leave the first two rows. He was a little late with that, but and back then, some of the old timers, you know, like I am now, didn't want to leave, so they would hang on to their, you'd have to peel them off the door jambs, you know, out of their homes. But if you didn't want to leave, they just armpitted you out back in those days. You didn't say, I'm staying. So nobody died from Pawleys Island to Little River. One person died in Little River. So all that did save a lot of people, because a lot of people had no idea it was coming. Now that night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, we all awoke to bullhorns and hard knocks on doors and people in uniform, 3 or 4 in the mornings when we heard it. And here comes the highest tide of the year, the lunar tide. Now everybody has stories. I remember talking to the lady at the Ocean Terrace years later. She didn't know a storm was coming. They didn't knock on her door. She lived near Springmaid. And so did the Nashes. So the Nashes come out and their car's underwater. So they can't leave. So Papa Nash knows one of the yellow cab drivers, an old veteran of Korea and World War II. And he said, well, hell yeah, I'll come get you. So he drove a cab down there in 3 feet of water and parked across the street and took all the Nashes to the church. Most of the places, the 2 churches, the grammar school, the high school, I think the library here was used as a shelter. But the owner of the Ocean Terrace, she had no warning. She came out and her car was underwater. So she walked a mile to the gate of the Air Force Base, which was Army Air Corps Base at the time, and in her slippers, in her robe, in her brassiere and underwear. And they took her to a shelter. And I'm sure there's 100 of those stories that I don't know. I wish I knew. So Hazel came in somewhere around Little River. People say it, little north, little south. And that 18-foot surge was nothing to, no one had ever seen a surge like that. That's the highest surge in South Carolina until Hugo, they said, was a 20-foot surge. We didn't get that high a surge here, even though it did a couple $2 billion damage here. There were, they say, 275 houses destroyed in Myrtle Beach. In the population, there was about 9,000, 8 or 9,000. Windy Hill, small little place, lost 120. Crescent Beach, 200. When I say lost, they were gone. Crescent Beach, 200, Ocean Drive, 450, Cherry Groves, 300. And then Long Beach had 360 homes. 4 were left standing on the second row. 9 people died. 2 were never found from Long Beach. Carolina Beach had a 15-foot surge, 365 buildings destroyed. So it was a monster because of that surge. You know, there was 100-mile-an-hour winds, 150, 160. But they don't blow everything down, but that surge will take everything in its way. Excuse me while I turn this. Holden Beach, 90% of the buildings destroyed. Curie Beach, total destruction, front row. 5-foot sand covered the entire main highway of 421. I had a customer that used to come in, Cagney's, Jerry and Connie Helms, and they asked me one day, have you lived here long? And I said, yeah, all my life. And they said, oh, were you here during Hazel? And I said, yes, sir. He said, next time we come, I'll bring you something. And they brought me the headlines of the Charlotte Observer. They were on their honeymoon, and they went to Oak Island. It was Long Beach back then, I think. They went to sleep. They were going to go to the drive-in theater that night, and they woke up, water pounding at the door. They were in a 1-story house on the front row. Their car was underwater. He said, I guess we're not going to the drive-in. So they waded out in chest-deep water and found a house on the second row, 2 stories, and broke in. They thought they'd be okay. Well, the water kept coming. They went to the second floor, and then when it got to the top window, he told his wife, we're going to have to go. And she said, go where? He said, he got a blanket, and they tied themselves together. And this was in the front page of the Charlotte Observer. And then they got a mattress and went out the window. They floated 1.5 miles, and they ended up the top of a tree for 6 hours. When the sun came out again, they crawled down in the tree, and they lived. They were scratched all to hell because debris was hitting them. Everything in Holden Beach was gone. I said, that's a better story than me and the Jeep. And I later met a lady named Leela Piggott. She said, I looked out the window and saw a shrimp boat heading towards the house. Hollered at my husband, there was a shrimp boat, and he said, what? I said, there's a damn shrimp boat heading to the house. And he looked out and he said, sure is, and it hit the house. And out we went, floating around for hours. So, I mean, everybody up in North Carolina, no telling how many of these stories, because they lost 23 people there. The Cape Free River reached the highest stage in history. Huge freighters broke loose and floated down the river. All 20 of Southport's shrimp houses were gone. Charlotte and Southport became oceanfront towns. Like I said, 15,000 homes completely destroyed. Now, I wish Jack Thompson was here to tell this story. Is he here? Well, I'm going to tell it not as good as he would. But he's a good local boy, and he's our beloved historian and photographer. And he was dating a girl in Myrtle Beach High School. That's where they both went, named Rachel. And they were quite young, and they wanted to get married, and the parents did not approve. Too young. So they eloped. And they eloped the night before Hazel. And she was working at the Broadway Theater. The Gloria Theater. So they got free tickets and free popcorn, free candy, and that was their honeymoon night. And then they had rented a little house behind the Gloria on that street behind the Gloria Theater. What's the name of that street? Withers Drive, thank you. And so about 3 or 4 in the morning, somebody's beating on the damn door really hard. And Jack said, I'm in my boxer shorts. I open the door and there's two soldiers and there's a half-track there. And he said, Rachel, your daddy has done found us and sent the damn army. And that's Jack's story, but it's a good one. Ask him about that story. He might have a better version. Now, every pier for 175 miles were completely gone, from Pawleys Island to Maryland. Fayetteville and Whiteville, 115-mile-an-hour winds. Hazel was moving at 50 miles an hour. And it didn't hit any mountains, so it never dissipated. It just kept that 115, 120-mile-an-hour winds. Raleigh, West Virginia, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Binghamton, New York, all experienced over 100-mile-an-hour winds and catastrophic flooding. Delaware, oil tankers torn from the moorings were all loose. 17 people died in Philadelphia. Virginia, 130-mile-an-hour winds. 12 people died in Virginia. New Jersey, New York City, 113-mile-an-hour winds at Battery Park. 3 people died in New York City. In southern Ontario, nobody knew it was coming. Is anybody from Canada here? They're mad at it. They're mad at us, I forgot. Still moving 50 miles an hour. It killed 85 people in Toronto, and it was the worst natural disaster in the history of the Toronto area. They had no idea it was on the way. Well, it's moving 50 miles an hour, and by the time you tell somebody, it might be there, you know. But bridges were washed out. They found pigs and cattle and trees, and Toronto itself became an island. And on one street, Raymore Avenue, 35 neighbors drowned that had no idea a flood was coming. It was similar to what was happening in North Carolina, mud floods. And so Hazel traveled 700 miles on land, going 50 miles an hour and not losing, well, it lost speed, but it stayed over 100 miles an hour for 700 miles. So all those people I mentioned up north, they were not expecting a storm. And by the time New York City, nobody was looking for 115-mile-an-hour winds. This is my dad sitting at the Ocean Forest Hotel having an illegal drink. That's the guy that put me in the Jeep and tied me with the seat. That's the front of the Ocean Plaza Pier, Ocean Plaza Hotel. That's the back of it. The only thing left is the Plaza Hotel. This was the pier right here. Everything's gone. This is Myrtle Beach. That's Myrtle Beach. The National Guard was here. They did prevent looting. And back then they carried guns with bullets, and the police carried blackjacks. So you did not want to loot. That's Myrtle Beach. That's Myrtle Beach. That's one of the great dance joints on the East Coast. That's Robert's Pavilion in Ocean Drive at the end of Main Street. This is Pawleys Island, so it created damage as far south as Pawleys Island. This is a North Carolina beach. I had this written down at home, but it didn't transfer to this little. That I think is Southport. And this is a headline from Port City. Hurricane Hazel leaves 107 dead, raging from the Carolinas into Canada. But it killed about 90 or 100 in the United States, and it killed 85 in Canada. This, I think, is Southport. I think that's Long Beach, part of Long Beach. You know, it was just devastating. This is one of the North Carolina beaches. I can't remember. It might be Curie Beach. This might be, that's Toronto. That's one of the beaches in North Carolina. That says Flamingo Coca-Cola there. Several houses. People, after the storms, occasionally a house would be picked up and my house would land on Egerton's property. So now, whose is it? Is it yours or mine? And there was a lot of that going on, and lawyers would call that, in legal terms, pissing contest. This is Washington, D.C. It destroyed several thousand trees. They had 110-mile-an-hour winds. That's in front of the Berkeley Hotel. They weren't expecting storms. This is in the Philadelphia area. It killed 17 people in Philadelphia area. This is Toronto. That's a bridge in Toronto washed out. This one street killed 36 people, Raymore Drive. They didn't see it coming. They never rebuilt that. That's sort of a shrine that's still there in a park to memorialize those loss of life. That's this is ice. So you get a hurricane when you have a frozen lake. That's what happens. It's a little more in Ontario. And that picture, I don't know where that is. I always like that picture. I'm just thinking, I want to know who that guy is. You know, here's a tree, I'll hang on till the damn thing's over. Anyway, it was a mess, but Myrtle Beach, the chamber of businesses all got together and started putting out messages that we were going to be reopened for summer. All those those one-story beach houses became three-story motels after that. And then in the late 60s, it became 5- and 6-story motels, and then 70s and 80s, you know. That's what happened. But after Hazel, most of our one-story little beachfront houses were literally gone, from Pawleys Island to all through North Myrtle Beach. And now some of those houses were built in North Carolina, but it took people sometimes years to find their lot because their foundations were gone. Where's your lot line? So it took years to settle. And I know some of the people in Cherry Grove, I know this one fellow, he was riding all over the place and he was writing his name on lumber. He'd swear that board was from his house. And that one too, you know, so he had his name, and I'm sure a lot of people did that. But if anybody has a question or a memory they'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. Egerton, I bet you do.
I've got a couple. When Hazel was coming, I lived in Conway on Lakeside Drive. I was about 9 years old, I guess. I was born in 46, like some more folks. And my granddaddy's sister lived on the next block. Her name was Lucille. And she asked my father, said, Jimmy, would you go over to my house at the beach and get it ready for a storm? We think it might be bad, we don't know, but would y'all go over and prepare my house? Her house was about where Maison Samir is now. There was nothing else up there. And she had what was a second row house. It was on stilts. She had given the lot in front of her house to one of her children that married a construction fellow from Florence named Quattlebaum. Mr. Quattlebaum built a huge, nice, fine home in front of Aunt Lucille's. I mean, it was something. And her house was like every other beach house, but it was on stilts. Our instructions were from Aunt Lucille to please go over there to my house, open all the windows, open all the doors, and nail them open. Now, my father got us in the car. We went over there and did just what she said. Mr. Quattlebaum had a crew of people over at his house, and they were putting boards and all this up. We went back to Conway. The wind blew, and we were up all night worried. And we came out all right in Conway. Then when we could, we went back to the beach and saw the devastation. And we went to check on Aunt Lucille's house for her. Her house was fine. It was just a little wet inside. The Quattlebaum house was totally gone. There was just a couple of little pipes sticking out of the soil. But that's just one of the stories. And
That's a good one.
And I always looked and was told by my parents and others that in every dark cloud, something good happens. And that was a devastating time. But they all said that that's when Myrtle Beach really came into its own. We had new buildings, new little hotels instead of boarding houses. About time people had money after the war and were traveling, Myrtle Beach was fresh and had accommodation. So that's just my stories.
That's a good one. That's a great story. I remember you telling that. Yes, sir.
Can I say something?
Sure. Jack?
It's just a little story, but my great-grandparents, who were from York County up near Charlotte, built one of the first beach cottages at Myrtle Beach back in the 1920s. It was a single-story house, and my great-grandmother, so the story goes, did not like it. So they rolled it back across the road and built a two-story house, which was at 2604 North Ocean Boulevard, where that Anderson Resort is now. Makes me want to cry when I go by there. But anyway, I was 3.5 when Hurricane Hazel happened, and we lived in Greenville. And I remember to this day my mother she was on a stepladder painting our living room ceiling and had the radio on, hearing about reports from the coast. Nobody knew that it was such a serious hurricane, just storm coming. Anyway, Hurricane Hazel wrecked our beach house, or my grandparents' beach house, tore the porches off, and the house moved toward the ocean and settled in the sand. But it was so well built that my grandmother, thank the Lord to this day, had the house rebuilt, and it was ready for us the following summer. But the Pilot House Motel, which was a rooming house back then, was next door. And Mr. and Ms. Morris, who ran the Pilot House, when they saw the front porches of my grandparents' house get pulled off and head to the ocean, they decided, well, we better get out of here. So they did, and the Pilot House broke in half. They had to tear it down, never saw that again. But anyway, in my family, and I think this is interesting, all through our lives, we referred to Hazel or Myrtle Beach as pre-Hazel and post-Hazel. That's the way it was always was. The house was in the family until 1981. We enjoyed it every summer. We actually moved to the beach every summer And when they tore it down, we all cried, but my parents and their siblings, they decided that it was time to sell out to a developer, and they did. And there was an Anderson Inn built there, then the Anderson Resort. But I'm thankful to this day for the memories of Myrtle Beach. And even though I was just 3.5, I remember being here the summer before because it was such a part of our lives. And then the following summer, we were also thankful. I remember my grandmother said, "We're going to church today to thank God for the house is still here." So that's our story. And
This is Darlene Jennings. I remember we drove down, they had a home on the ocean front. Where was your car?
Hurricane Hazel backed the car out of the driveway. It was a 1954 Buick convertible and parked it across the street in somebody else's driveway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, whose was it after that?
Whose car was it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Randy's? I don't know.
No, I mean, if it was in my house, it'd be my car.
I don't know. I'm sure Daddy bought her a new one.
Yeah.
Okay. So, real quick story. I was about 5.5 when the hurricane came. I was asleep that night, and like you said, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, knocking on the door, and I'm going, man, why don't my mom and daddy get up and see who's knocking on the door? So finally, I got out of bed, and I opened the door, and it was 2 policemen. And my first words were, my daddy ain't done nothing wrong. Anyway.
That's why your dad didn't get up.
So Dad got us all up, and Mother and my baby brother was still in diapers, and he loaded us up into the station wagon and drove us up to the high school. I remember when I was leaving, I said, I can't leave. I can't find my galoshes. And my mother said, get in that car. And then I wouldn't leave because nobody'd get my baby dolls down off the cornice boards. So the whole world stopped till Darlene got her Little Women dolls. Went up to the high school. Mother cooked eggs for hours and hours and hours for all the people at the high school. And to this day, I can't scramble an egg without thinking about her. Things that happened after the hurricane, our house, believe it or not, was not destroyed. And you know why? That water was able to get through that house. We had great big picture windows. It came in, it picked up the furniture, threw it out more picture windows, and dropped it into an empty swimming pool. So our furniture ended up in a swimming pool. We had a white picket fence around the house. That was gone. When we got the fence back after the hurricane, we had more fence than we had yard because the ocean had just chopped it off.
Yeah.
But my job after the hurricane was to beat the sand out of the mattresses. So as a kid, I'm out. Jimmy Brown, you probably remember that. And I got to play the strings on the baby grand piano that didn't make it into the swimming pool. But for years and years after that, anytime there was just a hint of a storm coming, Daddy would rent a couple of vans, Pete Reynolds, Jimmy Brown, were you part of it? They would go down to the house and load up all the furniture and move it away. I don't think we ever had a storm again that you needed to move that furniture. But that's my story of Myrtle Beach and Hurricane Hazel.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, what she says, for years after, there was stoves, refrigerators, you name it, in the ocean. And I think they had to open a tetanus booth on the beach because everybody was getting cut. So when we were swimming out in the ocean, if we found a stove or hit something iron, they gave us these little piece of string with a balloon or something on it or a float on it, And we dived down, we were 9, 10 years old. We thought we were scuba divers. And we'd tie something to it, so then somebody would come and pull that rusty stove out. But that was going on for years every night. It was good for fish, but not good for the tourists to hit one. But it was like the gentleman says, it was before Hazel and after Hazel from that day on for all of us who grew up here. And hopefully we won't have one again like that. Last year was the 70th anniversary. And people that remember, we found out about it 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and it hit at 9:30. It landed at 9:30. We were getting 50, 60 mile-an-hour winds a couple hours before that. But it made land at 9:30, so we only had 5 hours time. It wasn't like today when Jim Cantori here 2 weeks before the storm coming. All that satellite stuff was Buck Rogers, and it didn't exist. We were as good as doing that back in the day. I remember after the storm, everybody came up from it was called the Hideaway Lounge, which was the basement of the Cozy Corner, and it was the only basement in town. We all came up and everything was in your house too, but downtown. It did? Okay, there you go. I didn't know that. Anyway, I remember Dad walked out and he lit up a Player cigarette. And he went, "Everything looks like hell." And I remember at 9 years old, I thought, so this is what hell looks like, He got in his Jeep and he started driving. He drove south and then he drove north, and he was driving through rubble. Highway 17 had trees everywhere across. But I remember we went down to Spivey's Pavilion in where the USO Club used to be, and what was the motel and the Moody's Court. They had a bowling alley. All of that, you couldn't find a piece of it. And I remember Spivey's Pavilion. I'd gone down there several times with Dad. A Lebanese fellow, a bookie, was running it named Mike Thomas. And he was walking around, and I grew up in a restaurant, so I saw this shiny top sticking through the sand, little stainless steel, about an inch of it. And I started digging. I could tell it was an NCR cash register. So I was digging hard. And when I got it exposed, Mike Thomas goes, "That's my cash register." I found it. He didn't give it to me. He gave me a quarter. But those are the memories of Hazel. It was a bad memory, but now it's something we can tell some funny stories. But people, when you talk about losing 15,000 houses and two or 3,000 in South Carolina and 15,000 North Carolina, and losing that many lives, it wasn't funny. But the stories, now that we are hearing funny, we can laugh about every catastrophe years later. But thank y'all for coming. Thank you. Yeah. You good?
Good.
I'm good. if you're
Appreciate
good.
it.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Hey, Jack, I just told your story. Get up here and tell your own story.
Oh, look who's there. Oh, yeah.
Hello, my friend.
Sam, I'm glad you're here.
A master storyteller. I really don't have much to add. Maybe 10,000 photographs of Hazel in the aftermath. That brings up another question for the librarian. Perhaps someday in the fall, near Hazel's anniversary, we can show a picture show in here. Maybe 50 or 60 photographs of the aftermath of Hazel
Yes.
with your adieu. And you'll be my MC. But thank you. I just slipped in the back door and
I
wanted to
told
hear
them
you.
about the honeymoon.
Oh, no.
You got to tell them in your words.
Oh, no.
Tell them in your words.
Really?
Yeah, it's your story. I wanted you to be here to tell it. I was going to yank you up here.
Okay, let me put my phone up now. No darts, but I did hitchhike to Myrtle Beach when I was 13. Hanging out in a pool room in Greenville, the infamous Cat Dive, a little sandwich shop across from a Camperdown Mill, where everybody went over for ham and cheese, and the back room was a pool room. You could shoot pool back there, but you had to be 16 to go through the curtain. So my two buddies, Carol Campbell and Freddie Collins, we slipped around the back door. There was a big double door back there where they could get the pool tables in. So we leaned on that doorway and we watched these guys shoot pool. I mean, they were old guys. I mean, they were 18 or 19. And they were shooting pool. I remember the bottle of beer sitting up there. It was a beer called Schlitz. They were shooting pool for that bottle of beer. And I think it cost 15 cents. And we heard them talking about Myrtle Beach. They had just come back from Myrtle Beach. And you could dance with the girls at the pavilion. Mr. Burroughs had shag music on the jukebox. People were gathered around doing the shag, the hip hop, or whatever. And we thought that sounded pretty good. And they said, you know, the girls, they dance in bathing suits. And you know, if you be nice, you could walk them down the beach in the moonlight and show them the submarine races. So that sounded pretty good to us. And we said, we got to go down there. So we got our little money together, I think $2.71. We met out on the Highway 276, Malden, going to Myrtle Beach. And the highway at that time was about this wide. 2 lanes, very little traffic, and they were pickup trucks of farmers. So we put out our thumb, and a truck would pull over, and we'd jump in the back with a chicken and a hog and a dog, and we'd get settled down, and about 2 miles down the road, he'd pull over and say, boys, this is where I turn off. This is my farm over here. So we'd jump out, start hitchhiking again, and that scenario went on and on all day long. We'd get 2 miles, 4 miles, 3 miles. We'd stop in a service station. We'd say, you know, we'll take out the trash and empty the garbage and sweep the floor for a moon pie and a RC Cola. So that helped us get on along the way, and we finally got to the trading post over here in Aner. And we ran in there, and these two old men came up. I think, if I remember, one was named Joe and one was named John. Egerton, that'd be Joe and John Holiday. So, why'd you boys run away from a formatory? We said, no, we're going to Myrtle Beach, and we'll take out the trash and sweep the floor for a moon pie and an RC Cola. He said, well, boy, we got tenant farmers here, and we got a kitchen in the back with a big smorgasbord. You boys do your job, and at 2:20, Trailway bus will be by here, and we'll put you boys on the bus for Myrtle Beach. So we did, and we jumped off the bus at the on 9th Avenue, what used to be the bus station until it was knocked down. We ran to the pavilion, got a job. I ran up to the photo stand, and he was photographing a beautiful girl, looked kind of like Ruth. Pardon me, Ruth. Sitting on a half moon, it said Miss Myrtle Beach. Could have been you. And I asked, I said, I think I could do that. Do you need any help? He said, when can you start? I said, I get a hamburger and a milkshake, I can start right now. I'm full of moon pies. So I began a job in the first 15 minutes in Myrtle Beach. I became a professional photographer. And after 70 years, I'm still a professional. A little bit retired, but thank you. And Dino, I'm sorry I'm getting off the track a little
You
bit.
can get off any track you
To
want.
that honeymoon story you were talking about.
That's a damn good story.
But Carol, he ran to the beach, got a job with Mr. Baker, Beach Service, E.O. Baker. And
Carol Campbell was the future governor he's talking about.
Freddie, he laid down on the beach and went to sleep. Well, that night, Freddie comes in like this. And back in the day, there was an old song, poor old Kalijah, about an Indian that had got totally red skin. We said, you look like poor old Kalijah. You didn't have more sense than lay down in the sun here at Myrtle Beach and get burnt. So we went out to the jukebox with milkshake cups that we found along the way and bummed money from the girls to get Freddie a bus ticket back to Greenville. $7.21 was a bus ticket. And we did, and the next day we slapped him around on his sunburn and told him how foolish he was and sent him home. The next day, Carol's dad came down, and I said, he's down on the beach. He's renting floats. No, he's chasing floats. Mr. Baker would say, he had all his floats numbered, and he'd say, son, that float down at 2nd Avenue Pier is overdue. Go get it. Well, we know that's a half a mile, and Carol had to run all the way down and drag that big float back, number 22. So his dad went down and jerked him up, admonished him, put a shirt on him, and buttoned his collar all the way up. Because we all know that Carol always had his coat, his shirts buttoned all the way up, and took him home. I was sad about that. A couple of days later, my big brother came, scolded me. He said, you did a bad thing running away from home. We're going home tomorrow. I said, but I got a job. Well, I don't know. You did a bad thing. We're going home tomorrow. But I'm going on the beach today and get a suntan. I said, okay. He comes back off the beach that evening with his arm around a beautiful girl. He said, I ain't going home. He said, can you get me a job here? I said, well, Daryl's going home tomorrow. Maybe I can get you his job. Mr. Dwight Lamb that has Skip's studio is a pretty good fella, and he'll probably give you that job, which he did. Much to my lament, because that summer I worked my shift and Joe's shift while he was on the beach with Doris. That worked out pretty well because Joe married Doris Cohen, and they had 2 wonderful children, Joe and Michelle. So we had a wonderful summer, but the photo booth, the little booth there, had a stool that we sat right by the darkroom. And wouldn't you know, there was always a beautiful girl that kind of hung around watching me develop pictures. That was direct positive paper that you do the photograph and run that piece of paper through the chemicals and the image come up. And that was fascinating to pretty girls. And if they lingered too long, I'd say, would you like to have a seat on my stool here? So to make a long story short, every week I had a beautiful girl sitting by on that little stool. But the heartbreak of that story is, on Sunday they had to go home. And I was heartbroken. Until Sunday afternoon, a new girl came in. And that went on for about 9 weeks. The post office said, Jack, will you please tell the girl we can't handle your mail. All the mail came in general delivery, and all the love letters came and stuffed them in my box. But it was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful life. And I enjoyed that so much. Until that fateful day, I met that blue-eyed gal. Her name was Rachel. And I said, I've never seen blue eyes like that. Those are the most beautiful eyes. They look like running water in there. You're not crying, are you? She said, no, but I love to dance. And I said, well, I'll be off in a little while and we'll go out and dance. Well, we danced, and we danced, and then we danced the night away down at Spivey's, little place down on the waterfront. And we danced, and we danced, and the next day we danced. And the rest of that summer, I was in love with Rachel. And toward the end of toward Labor Day, I'm saying, well, honey, I'm sorry, you're probably going to go home. She said, well, I got a job as a waitress at Walgreens, and I can't go home. I said, well, why can't you go home? Your dad's going to come after you. She said, I miss my period. I said, oh my God. My mama never told me anything about that. I said, she said, my dad will come down here and he'll kill you. I said, oh my gosh. Well, we
I didn't tell that part.
gotta hatch a plan. So we went to Conway to the probate judge over there, and he said, well, how old are you? She said, well, I'm 15. And how old are you? I said, well, I'm 16. But Judge, we got to get married. She missed her period. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, her mother or father will have to come and give permission. Oh, how are we going to work that out? So that night on the counter at Walgreens, I wrote a letter. And I signed her mother's name. I said, Your Honor, I'm sorry I'm in a wheelchair. And I can't make that 10-hour trip to Myrtle Beach. But I understand he's a wonderful young man, and you have my permission to get married. Now, you won't believe this, but I took that letter and I went down to Trailway Bus and I got on the 6 o'clock bus to Winston-Salem. Rode all night, got off of when the bus pulled in, I noticed there was a mailbox right there. The bus pulled in and I got off and I mailed that letter. And I jumped back on the bus because it was a round trip. Would you believe how wonderful, who's the postal guy in here, how wonderful the mail delivery was back in the 50s. The letter got here faster than I did. The next morning, that letter came, and we took it to the judge. First thing the judge did was look at the postmark. Well, Well, okay, that looks pretty authentic. And well, okay, be at my house at 6 o'clock tonight, and we'll do the ceremony. Well, that was October the 14th, 1954. What a date that was in infamy, October the 14th. So we went to the little house out in the country, knocked on the door, and a little lady answered the door. And, what do you want? I said, well, we come to see the judge. He was going to marry us. Well, come on in. And over in the corner, she and her sister, I think, they were both senior citizens. And they were watching a little 19-inch television that had a clothes hanger for an antenna. And they were watching Amos and Andy. Some of you may remember Amos and Andy's sitcom. They didn't even turn it down while we were getting married. We got married to the tune of Amos and Andy on Highway 90. So we came back in a rainstorm, a violent rainstorm, almost running the car off the road. And when we got back into Myrtle Beach, Rachel had gotten a job selling tickets at the Gloria Theaters. And they gave us a free movie that night and free popcorn and Coke as a wedding gift. And just around the corner, beside Tony's restaurant, was the Welcome Inn, a big 4-story clapboard building. And I had a room up there, room 28, and that was Clint and Velma Phillips that had that Welcome Inn. And when I was in high school, and the way I paid the rent, every night when I got off work at Skip's, she'd have a room emptied out and a bucket of paint and a paintbrush, that big light up on the room. And she said, now, Jackie, when you get this room painted, I got a nice dinner for you. I said, yes, ma'am. I didn't think that finger would ever straighten out from holding that paintbrush. But I did that. At that particular time, my senior year in high school, I painted 28 rooms in the Welcome Inn. But they gave us a free honeymoon night up in room 28. And the rain is beating the shutters on the windows, and there was nothing but a long stairway outside the window, a ladder, so you could get out in case of a fire, or maybe in case of a mad father or something. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody banging on the door. And Rachel said, oh, I know that's my father. I said, well, what are we going to do? She said, honey, you got to answer that door. So my heart is about to jump out of my chest, and I get up and I go over and I open the door, and getting ready, and there's a military guy in a poncho, soaking wet with a helmet on, and he said, you got to come with me. I turned to Rachel and I said, he sent the National Guard. So we followed him down the stairs. She said, where are we going? I said, I don't know, but that truck out there looks like we're going to a concentration camp. Anyway, he took us to the Myrtle Beach grade school, and I got her settled down with some friends of ours, and I ran back to Skip's studio and picked up the camera, and the rest is history. Thank you so much. Oh, and by the way,
That's a great story.
4 years later, we had a little boy.
That's a great story, isn't it?
Thank you. Well, this was so much fun. So much fun. Thank you to Dino. Thank you to Jack. And thank you all for coming today. We appreciate it.